Hello, my name is Keaton Wetzel, and I am a transit planner at Nelson Nygaard, a consulting firm working together with BCD-COG on the Tri-County Link Transit Study. I'm here with you today to provide an overview of this project and an update on work done to date. I also want to invite you to take our project survey to help us understand what issues and opportunities with existing and future Tri-County Link service you'd like this study to address. This project is being managed by Belen Vitello at BCD-COG and overseen by Sharon Hollis, also at BCD-COG. My colleague Milbury Hurd is a project manager and point of contact for this study. In this presentation, I will provide an overview of the study and our schedule for its completion. I will also share findings from the existing conditions analysis we recently completed and some information on the survey we'd like you to complete to provide us with your feedback on how the study should proceed. So, what is this survey about and what kind of timeline do we expect for it? The Charleston region is growing rapidly, and Tri-County Link needs to plan the expansion and improvement of its services to keep up with this growth. Tri-County Link is developing this transit study to plan for more efficient, effective, and convenient service for the entire Tri-County Link area, including specific recommendations for the fast-growing Somerville area. This project is led by the Berkeley-Charleston-Dorchester Council of Governments, which governs Tri-County Link service. At the end of this study, our goal is to have developed implementable transit plans for Tri-County Link that result in more efficient, effective, and convenient service. We expect to make changes to the routing and schedule of bus routes, implement new types of services, and better serve existing and future destinations. We also want our plans to be integrated with all of the other changes that the region, Tri-County Link, and BCD-COG are seeing, including the future Low Country Rapid Transit line, other high-capacity transit improvements that are being studied, funding limitations, the rapid growth that we expect to see in the region that will be especially significant in the Somerville area, and the mix of different land uses between urban, suburban, and rural that are potentially best served in different ways. And we want these plans to represent rider needs and preferences, and that's where our survey will come in handy. We expect this survey to take 1 year of work. We began this project at the beginning of 2025, and we expect to wrap it up around the end of the year. We are currently in the midst of phase 1, which involves an existing conditions assessment and a round of community engagement. Our next phase begins in June and culminates in a second round of engagement to share our draft recommendations in September. We plan to spend the last quarter of the year developing the final plan and incorporating the feedback we heard in our draft recommendations in September before sharing the final plan with BCD-COG at the end of the year. Our work in phase 1 is ongoing, and this phase is about assessing the existing transit service and market and identifying opportunities for improvement. Importantly, we are seeking answers to the questions of what changes would make your life easier, what are your goals for future service, and what are your preferences among different approaches to providing transit. The answers we get to these questions are critical to informing 3 key deliverables, which are the market analysis. This provides an overview of the potential transit service that the region can support today and into the future, as well as a funding and financial assessment that describes existing and expected funding restrictions on Tri-County Link. Thirdly, we'll provide a dedicated set of project goals and objectives that will serve as our guiding North Star as we begin to develop recommendations this summer. Phase 2 is about the development of draft recommendations that's expected to take about 3 months beginning in June. We expect to provide recommendations for improving existing bus and on-demand service. We will be coming back to the public in September to share our draft recommendations, and we plan to ask questions like, how would these proposed recommendations impact you? Which recommendations do you think should be prioritized? And are there any key changes that you think are missing from the recommendations? We will incorporate your feedback into a draft on-demand transit plan, a Somerville transit plan, and a regional transit framework plan. With those deliverables in hand, we'll be positioned to create an implementation plan during phase 3 during the last 3 months of the year that sets Tri-County Link up for success as the region continues to grow. We will be asking you all, as well as regional stakeholders, if our proposed changes address the critical needs that you're facing and expect to face, if there are additional revisions you'd like to see in the final version, and whether these changes are in line with BCD-COG and Tri-County Link's expected funding levels. We'll use the feedback we hear to finalize our implementation plan, financial plan, and a final plan. It's vital to us that we get the entire community represented in our engagement process. We are engaging Tri-County Link staff through regular meetings and workshops. We're engaging local and regional agencies, municipalities, and key stakeholders during regular transit advisory committee meetings that are occurring at key project milestones. And we also want your feedback directly from you, whether you represent an existing rider of Tri-County Link service, or if you're curious about riding Tri-County Link, or even if transit is not for you. Before I share with you our survey link, I'd like to share with you the findings from our existing transit market conditions and market analysis assessment. One of the most important things we've learned is that transit is by far the most affordable mode for travel in the Charleston region. A monthly pass for unlimited Tri-County Link rides costs about $70 for adults. Tri-County Link therefore costs riders less than $900 a year. By contrast, automobile ownership and gas cost the average Berkeley, Dorchester, and Charleston County resident an average of $12,480 per year. Given that Charleston area residents spend on average 21% of their income on transportation, well-functioning public transit can remove a significant cost burden for many people, especially the approximately 20,000 folks who live in the area below the poverty line. When a region invests in quality transit, it can allow for greater upward economic mobility for its residents, as lessening the burden of transportation costs can allow for a resident's resources to be spent on other needs, such as education, healthcare, savings, and the purchases of goods and investments. Additionally, transit is the most efficient method of transporting people in environments where street space is limited. Cars use much more space than buses to move people, and the combined effect of thousands of cars on the road with only 1 or 2 people inside can result in significant congestion during peak travel periods. Transit vehicles such as buses can carry many more people down a street while using a fraction of the space that would be required to move those same people in cars. And the benefits of transit extend beyond alleviating congestion. Transit is both safer and more environmentally friendly compared to traveling in a private car. According to the CDC, communities with higher transit use experience fewer traffic-related deaths per capita, and transit use reduces per capita greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. Today, Tri-County Link provides 13 bus routes and 1 on-demand service that provides service across the region and the non-urban portions of the Tri-County area. The urban portions of the Tri-County area are served by a different transit agency, CARTA. Of the 13 Tri-County Link routes, 11 are what we call regular routes that provide service during much of the day on weekdays. Of these 11 routes, there are 4 routes that serve Berkeley County, 5 that serve Charleston County, and 2 that serve Dorchester County. An additional 2 routes provide rush hour only service to and from the Rivers Avenue Park and Ride, and are designed to connect to CARTA, which is the transit agency serving the urban Charleston core. Tri-County Link will also serve eligible ADA customers if they are being picked up or dropped off within a 3/4 mile of an existing route. In addition, BCD COG provides an on-demand pickup and drop-off service in the Moncks Corner area on weekdays from 10:45 a.m. to 1 p.m. that's called Link to Lunch. Link to Lunch works much like ordering an Uber or a Lyft. You request a ride within the service zone on an app or by calling Tri-County Link, and a vehicle will pick you up within a short window for transportation anywhere within the service area. This is a shared van with other passengers who have also requested rides on the service. Most of Tri-County Link services operate relatively infrequently, on average every 1 to 2 hours. This chart is color-coded to show how frequently the different routes operate today. The most frequent routes are the 2 CS routes that provide rush hour only service to and from the Rivers Avenue Park and Ride. The other routes provide service every 60 to 120 minutes on weekdays only. The C203, serving McClellanville and Mount Pleasant, is the only route that also provides service on Saturdays. We've analyzed the system's existing conditions and assembled our recommendations in 3 deliverables that we will be posting to the website once they're complete. The market analysis provides an understanding of the underlying demand for transit in the region. The state of the system provides an understanding of how well the existing transit network meets this underlying demand and customers' needs. Finally, route profiles will provide an assessment of each route and offers a menu of changes that would restructure the service to better serve the region. I'm going to share with you some major findings from the market analysis in the following slides. So, how do we determine the existing market for transit that exists in the Tri-County Link region? Primarily what we're interested in is understanding density. Where do people live and work, and how concentrated are these areas in terms of the number of people and jobs located there? Density is the most useful metric for understanding a transit market because it means that any investment in transit service will be more useful for more people. The following maps will show you how density varies throughout the Tri-County Link service area. Where demand is higher, Tri-County Link can feasibly provide more frequent and higher capacity transit services, such as a bus operating every 15 or 30 minutes during most hours of the day. It will also show you where demand is low. Low demand areas do not have the concentration of activity to support much service, and often the best ways of serving these areas is either with a very low frequency bus route or with on-demand or microtransit service similar to Tri-County Link's existing Link to Lunch service. Another way of serving low-demand areas is with Uber and Lyft trip subsidies or with a volunteer driving program that pairs riders up with volunteer drivers who get compensated for the mileage on their vehicle. Volunteer driver programs are very useful for large rural areas, and transit agencies across the country facilitate this type of service already today. I want to hone in on what options Tri-County Link may consider when serving low-demand areas, because as you'll see, much of the region is still very rural and low density. On-demand or microtransit, rideshare subsidies, and volunteer driver programs are best suited for the areas where there are people who need Tri-County Link because they do not own a car, or for areas where it's hard to walk to a bus stop, like for example if there are poor or no sidewalks, if there's difficult barriers like railroads, highways, or water, or if there are very circuitous or narrow streets. These services work best where there is not also bus service that Tri-County Link or CARTA is providing, since that would compete with bus service, which can carry many more people for less money per passenger. The maps I'm going to show you show how population density, employment density, and socioeconomic characteristics combine to provide demand for transit. We adjust population density to account for different groups' relative propensity to use transit, and we adjust employment density by 2 because jobs account for 2 times as many trips. People need to commute to and from a job site. Of the socioeconomic groups we're interested in, there are 3 broad categories that closely correlate with transit use, and those are race and ethnicity, vehicle ownership, and poverty level. Certain groups are more likely than others to take transit, and in the Charleston region, this is primarily people without cars, racial and ethnic minorities, and people with low incomes. The values shown in the table quantify how much more likely each of these groups are to take transit than the average Charleston region resident. We call this likelihood to take transit propensity, and we can even map transit propensities to see how this need varies across the region. In general, what we find is that neighborhoods outside of the CARTA service area where residents are most likely to use transit include along the future LCRT service corridor between Somerville and downtown Charleston, downtown Somerville, Sui along Eastern Highway 17, Ravenel and Parker's Ferry along Western Highway 17, and extreme western Dorchester County and northern/northeastern Berkeley County. Neighborhoods where folks are less likely to use transit include Mount Pleasant and Goose Creek. When studying the existing market for transit, we find that 2 areas are supportive of frequent service today: downtown Somerville and downtown Moncks Corner. Some corridors could support service every 30 minutes, and those include Highway 78 corridor between Somerville and the LCRT, North Main Street and Highway 17 to Nexton, and St. James Avenue and Red Bank Road. Some corridors could also support hourly service, and those include Dorchester Road west of 526 and Eastern Highway 17 to Sui. A key finding here is that outside of these areas, there is very low to no demand. These areas represent a majority of the land area in the Tri-County region. The blue lines show you where Tri-County service is currently operating, and you can see that Tri-County Link serves most of the areas with some demand, but also many areas with low or no demand. Now let's jump ahead by 10 years to talk about how this market is expected to change as growth continues. By 2035, Highway 78 between Somerville and LCRT can support frequent service. New areas that would be supportive of 30-minute service include the area north of downtown Somerville, the Live Oak Drive and Highway 17 corridor between Somerville and Moncks Corner. And there are also some new areas that are supportive of hourly service. These include the areas along Maybank Highway on Johns Island, the Whitesville and Cane Bay community, and along Highway 176/State Road between Highway 17 and Black Tom Road. Similar to today, the vast majority of the region has low to no demand for transit service, and that includes most of the rural and forested areas in outer Berkeley, Dorchester, and Charleston counties. Here is a zoomed-in view of the existing and future transit market, so you can see how much of this growth is expected to be concentrated in and northeast of Somerville, along US 52 and between Somerville and Moncks Corner. These are the areas we're most interested in for Tri-County Link to provide new and additional service by 2035. In summary, downtown Somerville and Moncks Corner could support additional service. In addition, several regional corridors could support additional service up to every 30 to 60 minutes, including Highway 78, North Main Street and Highway 17 to Exton, and St. James Avenue and Red Bank Road. More frequent service could also be supported on Dorchester Road and Highway 17 to Sui. There are isolated pockets of demand on Daniel Island, and some areas of low demand may be better suited by on-demand service, including around Lake Moultrie, far eastern Charleston County, and far western Charleston County. What's become obvious to us from the study is that we need to understand what balance Tri-County Link ought to strike between providing more frequent service to the areas that can support it versus providing service everywhere within the Tri-County Link region, even where demand is low. A more demand-based service approach would mean that Tri-County Link provides more frequent service in those darker shaded areas of the service area, where 15, 30-minute, or hourly service could be supported by existing and future density. It also would mean that there are some regions that do not get any service at all. Coverage-based service would mean that Tri-County Link provides bus service every 1 to 3 hours throughout the region, even where demand is low, in order to provide at least some service to as many areas as possible. It would also mean that ridership would be low, because service once every hour or less is just not very useful. There are pros and cons to both of these approaches. Ridership will always be much higher in densely developed areas than in lightly developed areas. It's also important to remember that all transit systems provide both types of routes, but most systems focus on demand-based services because transit is typically considered more useful and effective when more people use it. This is a key trade-off that we would like your input on, and we need your survey responses to help us understand what you think is the right balance to strike. So that brings me to the overview of this survey and what's next for this study. All of our service changes are designed to improve service quality, but we know we have to work within some tight fiscal constraints that will necessarily involve trade-offs between frequency, coverage, schedule, and route directess. We're curious to hear folks' opinions on what kind of levers they feel comfortable pulling to help control our costs. Are you comfortable limiting span of service in service of making service operate more frequently? How important is it to expand service to new areas versus improving the service Tri-County Link operates today? And how much of a walk are folks willing to tolerate in exchange for a faster trip and a shorter wait for the bus? Take our survey to provide your feedback. We're also distributing the survey on our social channels and on the Tri-County Link website. This QR code will take you directly to the survey and it will remain open until June. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about the Tri-County Link Transit Study. Follow these QR codes to visit our project website and the online survey. Thank you and have a great day.